Goedemorgen aan al onze kijkers. Goedemorgen aan al onze kijkers. Het is weer tijd voor een interview met key opinion leaders in de crypto space. Vandaag hebben we een speciale gast met Alexander Zahnd, de CEO van Zilliqa. Hello Alexander, how are you doing?
Hi Raoul, doing good. Thank you for having me on the show today. Quite excited to go through the interview.
No worries, it's an absolute pleasure for us to have you over and for you to give us some of your time to do this. As I imagine you're very busy with your new role as CEO for Zilliqa. So first I want to start a bit with your background. What brought you into crypto, and how did that path lead you to Zilliqa, actually, so that our viewers can get a bit of an idea of who you are?
Sure, pleasure to do that. So my background is in traditional finance, where I've spent about a decade focusing and managing large-scale treasury and regulatory projects, mainly with banks here in Switzerland. So when I joined Zilliqa, which was about 4 years ago, when I went full-time into the crypto space, I brought that lens and experience with me that I gained from my time in the traditional finance space. So over the past few years, I've taken a couple of different roles in the organization at Zilliqa, as CFO, and more recently also with the CEO responsibilities. And my focus has been to position Zilliqa not only as a performant blockchain, which is fully EVM compatible since June this year, but I also strongly focused on positioning it as a platform that is institutionally ready. More on that probably later. I personally see this as important because what we can see in the market and what I anticipate is that the next big wave in Web3 is actually coming from enterprises, but also from regulated environments. And my goal is obviously to make sure that Zilliqa is at the front of that shift.
Lovely, because that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you after what the goal is, but to be at the front of the movement and the shift of that area. And so this leads me, obviously, you just mentioned that Zilliqa 2.0 went live. I think this was end of June, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
In simple terms, can you maybe just say what's changed to the previous Zilliqa and why, previous iterations, and why it is such an important upgrade for the ecosystem?
Yes, happy to do that. But I have to roll up a little bit the history of Zilliqa to answer that, so bear with me.
No worries.
Zilliqa has been around for quite some time, so you can see it as a bit of a dinosaur chain. I know that term is not that popular anymore, but it came up this year, I think. So initially, the idea and the chain itself launched already back in 2017. However, it came with its own smart contract language. And if you talk to more academic folks, they will find reasons why the Zilliqa's own native smart contract language is better than other languages. But it also led to a bit of an encapsulation of the Zilliqa ecosystem. And that made it quite hard to keep up with the dominant players in the market. So for me, it was always a priority to remove the barriers to enter the Zilliqa ecosystem because I saw that as a big blocker in adoption, and I just want to make it available to everyone to build on it. In that sense, the launch of the new mainnet, and you were correct, it was late June this year, so only a couple of months since we are out with that. We achieved that goal by making it fully EVM compatible, right? So you can now, as I see EVM, right, it's kind of speaking like English, the world's most common language, but it's the world's most common smart contract language. And for me, the exciting thing is that developers and teams can now bring any Ethereum apps over to Zilliqa with almost no translation or friction. There's no need to retrain teams or no need for developers to learn something new, which is always quite hard, right? We can't hear you anymore.
Apologies, I was muted. I can imagine that being EVM compatible is probably a good goal, considering it is the main one in the crypto space. And my question to that is how, I think Zilliqa has mentioned just it's not another EVM clone. So what is it exactly about your version of EVM compatibility that is different or more useful for builders?
Yes. So I always look at it a bit in an analogy, right? The new mainnet being EVM first feels to me, and again, like economics background, a little bit like an isolated communist country that slowly opens up for free markets. So it's a quite exciting time to be in, and there's a lot of movement, a lot of transition. And because it's still rather young, since we have this capability, there's also a big catch-up that is happening from an ecosystem point of view. So for me, the specialty and why it's just not another EVM clone is a technical marvel. So I'm not a too technical person, so I'm always quite excited when I see how this actually works. And our infrastructure is actually also not only EVM compatible, but it's also backwards compatible in the sense that it can still run and execute our own smart contract language, which, as I said before, is called Zilla. So there was no hard cut of the community that has used to build with us since 2017 now onto the new mainnet. So it was, I find that quite an interesting and unique setup. However, on top of that, we also have a specific feature. You may have heard about it. It's a shardable sovereignty, also sometimes summarized as X shards. And that allows users to also build their own custom lanes. I don't think it's particularly unique in the setup because you also see other layer ones that provide similar features like ICP subnets. But you can think about it like spinning up your own sub-blockchain within Zilliqa, the infrastructure, but you can tune it for your own needs like throughput, fees, privacy, so you can parameterize almost anything. The uniqueness to me is still that while you do that, you don't isolate yourself, but you stay connected if you want to, so you can or you cannot, but you have the ability to stay connected to the main network and even to other subnets or shards by itself. So that creates a little bit of that network dynamic, which I find quite exciting.
I see. So it's like a big part of it is the ability to also just like personalize, so that you're not constrained to one form of doing everything, and you have the ability of choice, which I guess is quite important for a developer and builders. And yeah, of course, this X shards was going to be my question, and I wanted to know if you've seen any real adoption of X shards yet, or are most use cases still in like testing, proof of concept stage?
Yes, so the X-shard concept itself has been around for a long time. If you remember, or some of you may remember, Zilliqa was known for a very long time as the first one to implement sharding as a solution to the scalability problem of the blockchain trilemma, right? So we have always been very closely linked to sharding and the concept of sharding, of which X-shards also was born, right? So it's still in a concept phase in that sense that a lot of the things we do in blockchain feels like building solutions for problems that have yet to be found. Also with these subnets, again, all the chains have been doing it in a similar fashion like ICP or Avalanche. So there are plenty of examples out there, but I don't see any particular adoption right now. So now I need to get a little bit on the bigger picture. So what I mentioned at the beginning, right? So positioning Zilliqa as an institutionally ready platform. So we're working very closely with our partner, which is called the Liechtenstein Trusted Integrity Network, which actually tries to tackle the regulatory side of the whole Web3 experience and the blockchain industry. And through that angle, we try to free up and create an environment that is safe and regulatory approved for institutions to actually participate. And through that lens, I can see a very interesting concept and use case for an X chart, right? Because you can then isolate it. Isolation, probably not the best word, but you can restrict access maybe to only identified counterparties that go through like a verifiable legal entity identifier, which is one of the global initiatives.
I see. And to that, my question of, Zilliqa positions itself as, I guess, an alternative a bit to overcrowded chains. What kind of projects, other than obviously you moving towards institutions and governmental bodies or regulatory bodies, what other projects or dev teams do you think are best fit to build here? And are there any incentives or like developer grants or ecosystem incentives for developers to build on Zilliqa?
Yes, that's actually a very good question. And I think I mentioned it somewhere about this alternative to overcrowded chains. So I remember me saying that. So when I looked, as my CEO responsibilities, right, you have to look at strengths, weaknesses. Where are we? Where do we want to go? This is like a regular strategy assessment that you just have to do. And it always has two sides of the same medal, right? You can see a strength as a weakness and vice versa. So because of what I mentioned before, the Zilliqa ecosystem has been a bit encapsulated because of that high barrier to enter. So we are currently in a catch-up phase. So for me, this presents actually a strength at the same time, because it's a very interesting opportunity for almost any project or dev team that seeks to bring their ideas to life. And on Zilliqa, because of this catch-up stage, right, you can make a big splash and leaving a lasting impact, which will be much harder in an already mature environment, right, where you have to compete with many different applications and most of the use cases have already been tried out. So we have a state-of-the-art EVM infrastructure. We have active users. We have a community that is hungry to see new projects emerging. It's a perfect environment for even like maybe less experienced teams or teams that want to just explore the opportunities that Web3 and blockchain brings to try their products out and to bring it to life. What I think is very interesting, right? So I talked a bit about lowering the barriers to enter, which for me is very important. And like 2 years ago, we didn't have any AI tools. And for me, this changed the way I work and live entirely. And that's also why I'm so interested in bringing these aspects also onto the Zilliqa ecosystem. So what we're currently doing is we are about to release an AI-based MCP. That's a lot of abbreviations, but the idea is that it will facilitate and allow anyone to bring their projects to Zilliqa, but without requiring many years of coding experience, right? If I put myself back a couple of years, I had many ideas of what to build and what to do, but I did lack kind of the engineering or the coding skills to get it to life. But with the tools that we now have on hand, right? Okay, we have EVM compatibility, lower barrier to enter, plus a dedicated tool that supports you in actually bringing your ideas to life. Quite excited about this.
Lovely, that's good to hear. So this AI tool should, in theory, make it easier for people to build on the network. Essentially, like you say, removing this barrier of entry that you've experienced.
Exactly. Because when you do vibe coding, right, there are many good tools, but I think they're lacking a little bit once you start to integrate and to manage all the specialties of Web3. And, having a tailored solution for Zilliqa is quite an interesting story for me.
Yeah, like you said, I think vibe coding as well. It's something that, everyone, I've seen the huge boom in it, and it obviously has its certain limitations, especially if you come from like a non-coder background like myself or someone else, then it might be a bit more difficult to understand the ins and outs, because you just expect the code to be done for you and you expect it to be correct.
Exactly.
Well, I want to move on a bit more to now staking, security and performance of Zilliqa. And I wanted to know a bit about staking, and I saw something that you moved to a new system, which has like liquid and non-liquid options for staking. Why this change, and what's the benefit of this for the users?
Exactly. So we moved to a permissionless delegated proof of stake consensus algorithm with the new mainnet. It has been working a bit differently in the past, but that's where we positioned ourselves. Users can then freely pick and choose between a classic staking for simplicity or also a liquid staking alternative to keep capital usable in DeFi. So for me, it increases flexibility, but without compromising the validator security. If you want to run a validator, right, anyone can. It's permissionless. You just need to meet the requirements to be enabled in the consensus algorithm. So any validator can choose freely if they want to provide the classic or the liquid staking version. And through that, you don't need to rely on third-party protocols like Lido, right? Lido being the first one to actually come up with the liquid staking concept. And at Zilliqa, it's a validator choice, and the user can choose what they want to do. And I think this gives back a lot of freedom to the users themselves.
Yeah, so in theory, the users will be able to still reap the rewards without having to be locked essentially for an X period of time. They have a bit more freedom to choose what they do with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and yeah, I wanted to also talk about, for example, the security of Zilliqa, because earlier this year it faced the bridge security, which has obviously been solved and whatnot. But what have the lessons learned, and how has the team improved its approach to security infrastructure, or the infrastructure of security since then?
So in February this year, I think it was, so there was a dedicated exploit that targeted the token manager contract of our bridge, which is called XBridge. And, it has been quite a turbulent time and quite tough, but it has been resolved, and all the users have been made full out of Zilliqa funds, right? So that in that sense has been resolved, but obviously there were a lot of post-mortem lessons learned. So what we did is we isolated, mitigated, and audited all the modules of that particular part of the infrastructure. And the big lesson to me was that we need strict change management, and especially around cross-chain components, right? So we have tightened reviews and the monitoring accordingly. But at the same time, I also moved away from Zilliqa running its own applications in that sense, and focus more on the core of what we do, which is providing state-of-the-art blockchain infrastructure and the tools for third parties and developers to deploy their products on Zilliqa. So as part of that effort, the cross-chain infrastructure has been expanded. We have added dBridge and Houdini Swap, which provide the users additional rails next to XBridge. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for clearing that up. Yeah, and I saw that it had all been solved anyway, but I was just curious to see exactly what the next security steps were and whatnot. I also saw something interesting, which I forgot to mention earlier, but Zilliqa spoke about the scalability isn't just about transactions per second, because obviously a lot of blockchains focus on who could be the quickest and whatnot, but that could lead to lowering the standards of security and whatnot. So I wanted to know a bit, like, can you unpack that a bit, and how it applies to real world builders on your network?
Sure, no problem at all. I think when we look at the transaction throughput and what it means, and also overarchingly, I think it's very hard to differentiate yourself to pure tech in the whole blockchain industry. And so users use the iPhone because they just plug it in and it works. If you come up with another phone that has slightly better technical advantages, but it doesn't feel as smooth as the iPhone, it will probably lack adoption, even though the tech is better. So that differentiation to me is very marginal and is nice to talk about, but I don't think it will win trust or acceptance or adoption in any way. You can also clearly see that while over the past couple of years, L2 solutions have gained a lot of traction and a lot of activity moved away from Ethereum mainnet to layer 2 solutions, But at the same time, they invested into the mainnet to make it more scalable. And I think, if my understanding is correct, but that's at least what my least research has given me back, there's also more activity now flowing back actually from the L2 ecosystem back to mainnet, because that congestion problem and scalability problem is getting less of a headache. So to me, again, I think this technical differentiation is difficult to build upon. Anyway, so Zilliqa, the new mainnet, is pretty fast. So it comes with a targeted block time of about 1 second, which is one of the fastest out there. Finality around 2 seconds. So it is fast, but eventually I think the use cases weigh more than the technical details around the chain itself.
Yeah, I do also think that, yeah, when you're talking about a fraction of a second or such a small amount, I think it doesn't really matter so much, especially if that's not what the focus of your blockchain is, you know. And
Agreed.
I also wanted to speak about Kerry and VLay, which touch on identity and regulatory standards, seeing as you want to tie up with regulations and institutions. Obviously, institutional cases are a bit more of a focus now for Zilliqa. What are those again, and what have the struggles been in the path, or wow moments been through this whole process?
Sure, thank you. It's one of my favorite topics, actually, so a pleasure to speak about it. What we see is very actual, right? What we see from my point of view is like little pockets of adoption. We see NASDAQ coming up with its own chain to facilitate tokenized stock trading. All these things are very exciting from an institutional adoption point of view. But to me, it feels like it's pockets, and it's not like a general layer that solves this adoption problem. And, from my background and having been working in a heavily regulated environment, I know that regulated entities are very sensitive around what they can do and can't do. And to provide regulatory certainty around activities, for me, is the actual breakthrough, because that's not a pocket of adoption. That will be like a blanket that goes over everything and just sets the rules for institutions to actually participate and get into Web3, right? That can be treasury management, can be cross-border payments, it can be a lot of things, right? It just opens up a huge market, apologies, and a huge opportunity. So what we did, and it started about a year ago, we partnered with an initiative that was launched by the Liechtenstein government, small country, very innovative, rather quick for a government to get things done. And the joint venture is called the Liechtenstein Trusted Integrity Network, so LTIN, you mentioned it before. And we use that to lean into a thing that is called a verifiable legal entity identifier. So if you go back to the non-Web3 world, if you are a legal entity or a corporation and you want to participate in the traditional financial markets, you can only do that if you have a legal entity identifier issued to your company. Otherwise, you're blocked out. That links a bit to what I said before regarding X-shards and a bit permissioned access, right? And what we do is we try to create this verifiable legal entity identifier, which gives access beyond the traditional markets, but onto blockchain. And we use blockchain technology, Zilliqa, for example, to actually get that done. And for me, I see this as a missing link for true enterprise adoption overall, because setting the right rules and the right regulatory framework can be a huge breakthrough. For me, and Zilliqa, the unique pairing of our EVM compatibility, covering a very large space of the blockchain industry, the ability to create sovereign shards, and a standard like the verifiable legal entity identifier is what gets players or institutions access to Web3, actually.
Yeah, towards more adoption and bridging, I guess, the gap from traditional finance to Web3. And exactly. In my final question about this, the regulatory stuff with the Liechtenstein group, is the main focus for Zilliqa in Europe, or is the idea to to start somewhere else before Europe, or is there anything you can say about this?
Yes, absolutely. So it's a bit of a tough one because Zilliqa emerged out of Singapore. We have still a strong user base and strong adoption, mainly in Southeast Asia. That's kind of our core market where we were born in, and we obviously want to serve that community and that region as well. However, through the current initiatives out of Liechtenstein, which is also closely linked to EU regulation, MiCA regulation, all these fancy things that fly around, there is also a bit of a shift with regard to location, also towards Europe. But I think it should not be exclusive. I think regulators usually follow each other, right? You see MiCA implementation in Europe, but you see a similar concept then in the US, and you will see similar concepts popping up all over the world. And eventually what we try to provide is say white label solution with the verifiable legal entity identifier that in the best case can be applied globally.
Yeah. And do you think that, I guess, the regulatory hurdles will depend based on the location where you're at? So I don't know if maybe in Singapore it might be easier to do this, or the regulations for crypto might be a bit more better for adoption, whilst maybe some other places are a bit more new and will take some time to do, well, not convincing, but to show them the potential of Zilliqa.
I do agree. However, I just spent quite a lot of time in getting through a regulatory assessment in Singapore because they have tightened the rules and regulations around blockchain activities quite a bit. And I think there was also, I could just call it a bit of an exodus of blockchain companies and just moving out of Singapore, maybe to Hong Kong, which has a bit of a which gained a bit more traction. However, overarchingly, setting rules is a good thing because that gives you clarity what you can do and what you can't do. Even the tightening in Singapore is not per se a bad thing. It just sets the rules correctly. And I think with MiCA and also with Liechtenstein having one of the most advanced regulations around crypto, these are just starting points where we can actually lean into. But I think this is a global trend that will just mature in the short-term future.
Well, thank you very much, Alexander. That's wrapping up the interview like that. I want to thank you for your time. It was definitely very informative, and I think our viewers will definitely enjoy this.
Thank you, Raoul. It was a pleasure.
No worries. Thank you. Cheers.